Good afternoon, I'm the Modern Warfare historian and welcome to the Warfare Room Operation. Last time we discussed about the Japanese invasion at La and Salamaua and the American air raid from Lexington and Yorktown. The Japanese next objective was Port Moresby. However, to do so, they needed to occupy some secondary objectives. On the 30th of March, two platoons of the Special Naval Landing Forces landed and occupied Shorten Island, and on the following day, Kieta. No enemies were present. The first objective was important as it enabled the construction of a seaplane base, while Kieta was important as an airbase and as a port for following operations. The Admiralty Islands were invaded on the 8th of April, landing unopposed at Lorengau and occupying the nearby airfield and anchorage. While the Japanese were having success on the ground, they were having a lot of problems in the air. An air war of attrition had just started. January and February saw some action over Rabaul and Gasmata, with RAAF and USAF planes making almost daily raids. Losses in manpower and equipment for the Japanese were minimal, but steadily mounted. In response, the bombers faced 8 cm AA guns that were inadequate for the task. On the 3rd and 4th of February, the Japanese bombed Port Moresby with 8 and 5 H6K respectively. On the 23rd, the Japanese were surprised by 5 B-17, a bomber that they were not able to fight against. On the 14th of March, 9 Japanese bombers raided Port Moresby, and 8 bombers with 12 Zero fighters attacked Horn Island, hitting Australia for the first time. At Horn Island, they were engaged by 13 Hurricanes and P-40s. The Japanese reported 9 enemies shot down and 3 bombers destroyed on the ground, losing just 2 fighters that did not return. The Australians reported that 9 P-40 took off. A Hudson was lost on the ground together with some airfield facilities. 5 P-40 were damaged and 1 lost. The RAAF claimed 1 bomber and 4 fighters downed. Interestingly, 2nd Lieutenant A.T. House attacked a Zero, but because his gun jammed, he decided to use his right wingtip to hit the Japanese cockpit. The P-40 lost around 3 feet of wingtip, and the Zero was reported firing away towards the sea. 2nd Lieutenant Cleveland Sanford bailed out of his plane, nearly drowned, and had to recover for 10 days. His story is very interesting. It probably needs a video on its own. If you're interested, check the description. Interestingly, Japanese intelligence was unaware of the airfield at Horn Island until they found infos in a lockheed down at Gasmata on the 3rd of March. On the 17th and the 18th, the Japanese bombed Tulagi. On the 22nd, the Japanese held Lae was attacked, strafing 9-0 and 1 Betty on the ground, and 2-0 were lost in the air. The Japanese counterattacked Port Moresby the next day, apparently destroying 6 small and 1 large plane on the ground. In total, the Japanese had 36 bombers, 45 land-based fighters, 6 land-based recon planes, 9 carrier-based fighters, and 12 flying boats, for a total of 108 planes. Between the 4th of April and the 9th, the Japanese lost 12 planes to 13 Allied ones. On the 10th, the Japanese had 135 planes plus the Mogami Kawamaru planes that were no more than 12 recon seaplanes. Operational planes were around 37, however. The number rose to 88 by the 1st of May. If you're interested, there's a great book in the description, Japanese Army Operation in the South Pacific area, that I really recommend. What about the Navy? After Lae, it was reinforced with powerful assets like aircraft carriers in order to invade Port Moresby. Total number of ships was around 66, including submarines, transport and auxiliaries. 12 of those were assigned for the landing at Tulagi. That happened on the 3rd of May, without resistance. The next day, the Moresby invasion force departed. At 6 a.m., the Tulagi Task Force was attacked by carrier-based planes that sank the destroyer Kikuzuki, 2 minesweepers, and a submarine chaser. 5 or 6 Japanese planes were destroyed, 1 destroyer and 1 transport ship damaged badly, with 87 killed in action and 124 wounded in action. The Americans lost just 4 planes. As always, Japanese tactics are super complex. Operation Mo required the coordination between 5 task forces, not including the Tulagi one: the main body, the striking force, the support force, the invasion force, and the covering force. 3 of these task forces were assigned for transport duty. There were 2 carrier-centered task forces. The MO main force had the Shoho, a light carrier with 18 planes. The Mo carrier striking force had the Shokaku with 58 planes and the Zuikaku with 63 planes. Of all these planes, 109 in total were operational. The Allied had Yorktown, 65 planes, and Lexington, 69, 128 planes operational in total. Keep in mind that the US had in total 5 carriers in the Pacific, but Saratoga was under repairs, while Enterprise and Hornet were occupied by the Doolittle raid. The attack on Tulagi was performed by Yorktown in 3 waves, while Lexington was farther south refueling. On the 6th, the American carriers linked up and headed northwest. Task Force 17 detached the tanker Neosho and the destroyer Sims that headed south in a safe area. On the evening, the Japanese, without knowing it, came in 70 miles from the Task Force 17. Had they launched recons instead of relying only on flying boats, they may have had a chance of crippling the US Task Force, as who sees first hits first. On the next day, Japanese scouts spotted south the tanker and the destroyer, mistaking them for a carrier and a cruiser, and the striking force launched 78 planes. However, minutes after takeoff of the planes, a report came from the west, another carrier. In order to not break radio silence, the admiral of the Japanese forces decided to not recall the attack. The Sims was hit with 3 bombs and it sank, taking with her 239 lives. Only 12 survived. The Neosho was hit by 7 bombs and was scuttled 4 days later, with 109 survivors over 293 men. 1 Japanese bomber was lost. Still, Task Force 17 had no idea where the enemy was. Task Force 17 spotted 2 carriers and 4 cruisers north of the Louisade archipelago and launched 93 planes. However, when the scout returned and revealed that he spotted 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, they found out that the coding device had malfunctioned and changed the message. Still, the Americans found the light carrier Shoho and decided to attack. And yes, the convoy was in a vulnerable position because the striking force was 2 days later on schedule due to weather reason and operational reason. 3 Japanese planes were airborne against 18 fighters, 53 dive bombers and 22 torpedo bombers. Shoho maneuvered and dodged 13 bombs, then launched 3 fighters. Still, the difference in air power was very notable. Then 15 dive bombers came and scored a single direct hit. Then a 1000 bomb hit midship. 5 torpedo hits were scored on the burning light carrier. Yorktown planes finished the job with 5 or 6 bombs and 2 or 5 torpedo hits. Reports have different numbers. All the Japanese 18 planes were lost, while the US lost 3 planes. 631 of the crew perished, with 203 surviving. The convoy routed north and postponed the attack for 2 days. Land-based bombers spotted a 3 heavy cruiser and 3 destroyer-strong fleet south of the Louisade Islands and attacked with 11 fighters and 31 bombers, but no hits were scored. This was a detachment of Task Force 17 under Rear Admiral Cray's command. This detachment was also attacked by 3 friendly B-17 and they too missed the ships. The Japanese, who were always cautious during all the battle, decided to now take a gamble. 27 bombers were launched after 2 p.m. for a Twilight battle. Because most of the crew was inexperienced, there were launched only a few planes with highly skilled pilots. They were unable to find the carriers, but were ambushed by American fighters who were aided by the coordination of the ship-based radars. 8 torpedo bombers and 1 dive bombers were shot down. The rest went forward, but then gave up and dumped their bombs and torpedoes and headed back. And guess what? While on their way home, they found American carriers. They were useless now. In all the confusion, some even tried to land on Yorktown but ran off when they received anti-aircraft fire. All 18 remaining landed safely. The Japanese had now lost the element of surprise. At the start of the 8th of May, the US had 128 planes, of which 117 operational, while the Japanese had 109, 95 operational. In the morning, the Japanese fleet, having been spotted by planes, was attacked by 75 planes. Task Force 17, also spotted by aircraft, was attacked by 69 planes. Both attacks happened almost simultaneously. The Japanese Zuikaku was able to go under cloud cover, and the Shokaku had 16 fighters in the air. The first 7 bombs missed, but then a bomb hit the front of the deck. US pilot John J. Powers dived too much in order to ensure a hit. His bomb hit midship, but he and his gunner were killed in the dive. He was posthumously awarded with the Medal of Honor. All the torpedoes missed. Lexington's strike lost 14 planes in the bad weather, so there were only 22 against 13 fighters. The first one, by 4 bombers, scored 1 hit. All the torpedoes missed again. The Americans lost 3 fighters and 2 bombers, while the Japanese lost 2 fighters. The Japanese wake-on plane that spotted the carriers led the strike group to the target, but this meant that they wouldn't return. He was shot down soon after the battle. All 3 on board were awarded a posthumous letter of commendation signed by Admiral Yamamoto. Lexington was aimed by 19 dive bombers and 14 torpedo bombers. Yorktown by 14 dive bombers and 4 torpedo bombers. The Americans had 43 planes as combat air patrol over the carriers. Lexington at first avoided a lot of torpedoes, but was then hit twice on her port side. The dive bombers scored 2 hits, causing minor damage. Yorktown was hit by a single 500-pound bomb that exploded 6 decks under the surface of the ship. Japanese lost 5 dive bombers and 8 torpedo bombers, while the US lost 3 fighters and 5 dive bombers, used as combat air patrol. The Japanese ditched 7 planes and 12 more after they had landed because of the damage they received. Total Japanese losses on this day were of 34 aircraft against 19 lost by Task Force 17. However, Lexington suffered an internal explosion and it was scuttled. 216 were killed on a crew of 2,951. On the carrier, 35 planes went down with the ship, so Task Force 17 had just 39 planes in total. The Zuikaku had 39 planes and had to turn back. Shokaku retreated and had to go to a repair dock. In the end, the US lost the carrier Lexington, tanker Neosho, and the destroyer Sims. 66 planes lost, 35 aircrew killed, and 543 men killed. The Japanese lost the light carrier Shoho, a destroyer, 1 submarine chaser, and 2 minesweepers. All except the Shoho lost at Tulagi. 77 planes lost, 90 aircrew killed in action, and 1,074 men killed. Some reports, however, state that 4 auxiliary ships were lost, 80 planes were downed, and 900 people were killed. So, who won? The Japanese had a tactical victory as they sank 62,600 tons against 13,900 tons lost. However, the Allies stopped the Japanese landing, and the two fleet carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy were unavailable for the Battle of Midway. The Shokaku was unavailable because of repairs, while the Zuikaku had to recreate her air group. Could the Japanese have won this battle? Yes, and we will discuss on how very soon in another episode, because first we'll need to see how the Japanese decided to take Port Moresby after the Battle of the Coral Sea. Thank you for watching, and remember to always check reliability of your coding device.